In the wild, lace monitors we usually only breed once a year. Because these ones are indoors, I can breed them more than once a year. And they're known in the wild, especially in the southern parts of the range. No one knows what happens up north, but in southern parts of the range, they're definitely known to nest in termite mounds. And there are a couple of good reasons for this. One being that they have a really long incubation period, really long for a reptile especially. It takes, in the wild, it'd be about 10 months for the eggs to incubate. So the only way they're going to carry on right through a winter is if they don't get too cool. And termite mounds are temperature controlled and humidity controlled. And they're also really good for protection because the termites will seal the mound and then defend it from other nest invaders. So what I've done with my captives is I've kind of simulated a termite mound by making a nest box that's enclosed and heated and temperature and humidity controlled. And so far the female seems to love it. Unlike a lot of other lizards, courtship in monitors is usually very gentle. There'll be a lot of little head twitching signals between the male and the female. The female lets the male know that she's receptive. She'll walk away from him really slowly with her head down, and he'll very gently walk over the top of her until she stops moving, and then he'll coax her to lift her tail by doing some signals with his hind legs, kind of a guitar strumming motion. There's quite often a lot of foreplay with him very gently tongue flicking around her face and the rest of her body. And you can tell that he's got this really intense concentration because his pupils get really tiny. They'll continue mating for about a week, and then I'll keep the pair together probably for about 3 weeks. So I'll put a partition in the enclosure and separate them a week or so before she's going to lay eggs. So when the female is getting ready to lay eggs, she'll start doing little test digs into the nest box. She'll kind of dig little holes and check the temperature by sticking her snout in. And I call these nose holes. And I'll quite often notice a few nose holes around the enclosure during the day, and then sometimes these holes will get bigger and bigger and bigger in the big lead up to egg laying. And then usually on the day, or maybe the day before, she'll completely excavate a tunnel into the nest box. It'll go right to the bottom where the heat source is. And then on the day, she'll be quite restless, walking around a lot, and eventually late in the afternoon, we'll go down the hole, we'll turn around, and sit quite often with her head or even her forequarters out of the nest, and we'll stay like that for 2 or 3 hours while she lays eggs. Now you can see when an egg is coming out because her body will flinch. And she's got a kind of a dopey look on her face. She's in a little bit of a trance and doesn't notice much around her while she's laying eggs. Once she's finished laying eggs, she'll come out of the nest box, turn around, stick her head back in, and then start pushing the eggs into place and pushing the substrate around them. And we'll keep doing this. We'll keep going in and out of the nest box until the eggs are completely covered over and the whole area looks like it's never been touched before. And then she'll quite often leave the nest box and then start digging around the enclosure, starting off trying to kick substrate back at the nest box itself, and then just kind of randomly digging around the place, which is just the hormones which haven't worn off yet. And it takes her sometimes up 12 to 24 hours for those hormones to wear off, and then she's ravenous, absolutely starving, and starts feeding again. One of the reasons I separate the male and the female before she lays eggs is immediately after laying the eggs, she becomes really defensive of the nest site and will try to attack the male. She's fine with me. I can collect the eggs while she's watching and doesn't seem to register because I guess her instincts tell her that the most likely candidate for egg robbing is going to be another goanna, whereas humans haven't been in Australia long enough to register in their instinctual repertoire. The eggs are normally laid at a spot in the nest box that's around 30 degrees. So I'll usually check the temperature just out of curiosity and write it down. And I'll mark the eggs with a pencil on top of the eggs. I'll number them. That way, if they're rolled later in incubation, I know which is the right side up. And I'll put them into perlite, which is being mixed with water, and then cover the whole egg container with Glad wrap and put the lid on it to hold the Glad wrap in place. The lid has holes in it to allow gas exchange. Glad wrap's great for this because Glad wrap allows gas to pass in and out, whereas it holds the moisture in. Incubation in captivity takes anywhere from about 6 to 9 months, and so you have to be very, very patient The longest I've had an egg take to hatch was 295 days, which is a long time to be biting your nails. The eggs start to dimple quite often, about a month before they hatch, where they're getting rid of excess moisture, and I know that they're in the lead up to hatching. And then one day I'll notice a little tiny slit in the egg, pipping. They've got a little tiny egg tooth, which is quite visible when they've got their head sticking out of the egg, and they'll slice up the egg, sometimes slicing it into ribbons, and then we'll have their head resting out of the egg for anywhere up to 12 to 24 hours after the initial slit. Once the eggs have slit, once they've done that initial pip, they'll quite often slice the end of the egg to ribbons and then stick their head out, and will rest like that for any length of time between 12, 24, sometimes even 48 hours. And what's happening while they're doing that, it's really important not to remove them from the egg when they're doing that, because they've been breathing via their umbilical cord through blood vessels on the surface of the egg, and they've got to wait for those blood vessels to close down and dry up, as well as the umbilicus, get used to breathing air, and then emerge fully intact with nothing dragging behind. I'll leave them in the egg box in the incubator for a couple of days after they've hatched, just to let them dry out and get used to walking around, and then I'll put them into the enclosure. How soon they start feeding depends on whether they've got a big yolk reserve. If they've got a huge belly, they may not start feeding for about a week. And if they're fairly thin when they come out of the egg, they might start feeding within a couple of days. I've never had a problem getting them to start feeding. That's one of the great things about goannas. They're just not one of those reptiles that refuses food. So this one here hatched just a couple of months ago. This is sort of last season's young. They're beautiful when they're small, just miniatures of the adults. They don't like being handled. I don't normally handle them much. I leave them alone until they're bold enough to want to interact with me on their own terms. But and they're not. The funny thing is that they have a reputation of being a bitey animal, but they're really they bite in self-defense. And if you move slowly, they're biting as a last resort. This one will probably have a few goes at me, but it's more of a defensive thing than anything else. You can see its throat's puffed out. The best way to get a baby to grow up into a calm adult, something that you can interact with when it's bigger, is to leave it alone. And it'll hide a lot. The first few months of a goanna's life, it's called empty cage syndrome. You've got an empty enclosure, you put food in every day, and you take an empty dish out every afternoon, and that's all you see. And then every now and then you might catch a glimpse of it out basking. It'll wait till you leave the room, and then it'll disappear, so you don't see where it's hiding. After a few months, they start realizing, if you don't handle them, if you don't pull them out of their hide spot or anything, they realize you're not a threat, and they'll start staying out basking while you're in the room. And then you can try to get it to feed from tongs. And once you've got it feeding, then it'll recognize that you're a source of food, as well as... Notice it's not trying to bite my hand, it's trying to bite the big face that's staring at it. Anyway, so once it's out and basking with you in the room, then you know that it's starting to get used to your presence, and you can start slowly trying to get to come up to you for food. And once you've got it really comfortable with sitting on a hand while you're feeding it with the other hand holding tongs, then you can try giving it a stroke under the chin every now and then. And it's just a matter of a whole lot of very small steps. It's kind of, you try to imagine you had a wild possum that you're trying to get used to you wouldn't grab it and hold it until it stopped struggling. You'd never see it again. So you've got to sort of offer it food and have it slowly get used to it. And it can take months. My adult female took almost 4 years before I could handle her. Males tend to be really good. Males will calm down very, very quickly. That normally about 6 months, and they're used to people. I'm pretty sure this little one's a female. They're normally hard to sex at this size, but she's got the little head and skinny tail of a female. Now you notice that what looked like a yawn before, she's not suddenly bored with our company. That's a gape. Normally it's a much slower, drawn out like that, and that's a part of their threat repertoire.
While it may appear to be another species, the banded phase of the lace monitor, known as the Bell's form, is simply a regional variant from the western parts of its range. This attractive and highly sought after morph commands a higher price than the more common striped version, but is becoming more readily available.